Hello and welcome to Race Streamer. In this episode we're at Whilton Mill, which happened at the beginning of October on the international circuit. You're going to see us take the cut through here, so this is not the circuit we raced. But anyway, so to start off the day, I did the full half-hour test before this one, even though it's a circuit that I'm comfortable with, but it's because I booked a tuition slot with Niki Richardson to see if he had anything to say that might help me improve my driving, and for sure it made a massive difference. This is the most consistent that I've ever driven at a race event, and it's purely down to the way that I use the brakes, particularly trail braking and going into the corners, that we ended up working on throughout the test session. It didn't give me outright more pace, but it gave me far more consistency, which I definitely reached by the end of the day. So what you're about to see is a rather good day of heats, and also what you might have just seen is me deliberately nudge the driver in front, because I could see he was figuring out he needed to be in the space ahead, as I knew I also needed to be a further place ahead, and well, yeah, it's because the driver was on the wrong side of the grid. But anyway, all sorted itself out before we got to the final corner, which would be far too last minute Larry then. And what I didn't anticipate is the pole man going very early on this one. So I think quite a lot of us on the side of the grid, you can see the space between the drivers, we didn't catch on very well. But anyway, starting out in 12th in this one, which is again my lowest grid start of the day, is always tends to be the first heat at the moment. What you'll see on the inside here is everyone bunching up braking really early. Unfortunately, I just ran into the back of the driver ahead, so that would have given me a contact warning had I actually made it round to the end of the lap. Now that sound you could hear was a kart engine trying to drive a chain for which there wasn't one. So the chain snaps when I ran that curb. Previously I've said to other drivers that I thought I got a nudge from behind, but honestly that wasn't the case. What actually ended up happening is that I ran the curb just too much on my own and I buggered it, basically. Now you can see from this slow-mo replay that James Corp, who's ahead, really cuts the curb here. I decided to do the same just because I wanted to give drivers on the other side more room, I guess. And it worked for him and it totally didn't work for me, so it's just unlucky, but that's the risk you run when you run the curbs like that, I suppose. So because of that, I had no drive. I had to wait to be collected by a pusher cart and took a trip back to the service area, and that was it. I wasn't allowed back out because I'd ran the curb and I broke the cart through that, and that was the end of my race, sadly. So as much as I just said earlier that it was a good day of heats, this was a massive blip in it, but I have to be honest and say the rest of the day it felt like it went really well, actually. It's just this was a shocking start. Right then, on to Heat 2, starting in 4th position on this one. So it was much more important that I tried to hold position on this race because I had a good opportunity to score good points finishing up the front. And you might be able to hear, but my car engine's revving quite high, so it was slipping quite considerably, but that was giving me the impression that I had an absolute rocket underneath me, and it turned out it was that way. So this heat was pretty good fun as it goes. Now I've got Mikey Nichols starting in front of me in 2nd place, with Dan Siegel on pole, Roger Davis alongside me, Chris Powell Prem behind, Peter Knight not far behind as well. Those are all going to be players in this race. So unfortunately for Mikey, not getting the greatest start there just because I'm not sure his car picked up as well, and him washing wide in the 2nd corner gives me an easy chance to get through into 2nd place. So thank you very much for that. I think I had Peter Knight up my inside there, so I just had to make sure I gave him room, but thankfully he also gave me room, and we got away unscathed with that. So priority now, I can see Dan Seeger ahead already somewhat in the distance. Considering we've had half a lap already, that's pretty impressive from his point of view. So the thing for me now was just trying to get my head down and chase down Dan. So I've skipped ahead to the start of lap 3 now. I've closed down the gap to Dan ahead a little bit, and we're going to see some of the differences between where I was gaining lap time on Dan through this lap. And for the record, Dan is a quick driver. He's been in plenty of A finals this year running up the front of the Class 2 class, but you can see how much more speed I carried through Christmas corner there, and it's surprising how much speed you can carry as it goes because it's positive camber, and the same through that Ashby hairpin there, getting on the curb, making more use of it and getting a smoother weight transfer, which is helped by the trail braking that I've been going through with Niki Richardson, which puts us right on the back of Dan, pressuring him for first place here. Now, I'd had Peter Knight try to overtake me on the previous lap, which I wasn't having any of, and I just said, let's go and chase down Dan. So he stuck behind me, and he followed me onto the back of Dan here. So I was conscious I still had Peter Knight close behind, and I wanted to try and overtake Dan as quickly as possible because I'd seen how much I'd gained on him in a short space of time, and I didn't see the point in trying to stick behind because I was worried about the rest of the field potentially catching up as well. So I see I'm closing on to Dan here, and I know that I can brake later than him into Ashby, so I give it a go, and it works just about. I've got his inside, so I know that I'll have the line through this corner. I take a bit too much curb on the inside, that compromises me on the exit, and the slippery little fellow Peter Knight comes into first place, unfortunately. So he bided his time absolutely perfectly there, it has to be said. Now, him compromising his line through the last two turns, unfortunately I couldn't get back on his inside, so I decided to give him a bit of a nudge just so it helps him out go a little bit further ahead, because I didn't want to get compromised from Dan Seeger still being pretty close behind me at this point. And Peter's not got a clean run going for him at the moment, so you can see how defensive he's going into Christmas here. So I was kind of hoping that I might be able to try and overtake him into Ashby. I was really happy with my braking down there, so I have a look. He sees me, goes defensive, so I think, okay, I'll just take the normal line. And up pops Dan Seeger on the inside, unfortunately, so I lost out there. Daz Teal coming along as well with a ridiculous move round the outside of me, straight onto the inside of Dan. Fair play to him for that. I managed to follow through, get on the inside of Dan there, so back into third place. Crazy couple of corners, but I can see Peter Knight gradually escaping in the distance, so trying to stay on the back of Daz was going to be a nice thing right now, but that's always a tough task when you're talking about trying to keep up with a Class 1. There's a reason they're Class 1s, it's because they can drive well. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't catch up to Daz, but I did maintain the gap to him ahead. What I didn't know is that other drivers from further down the field had caught up to me. So what you're about to see is me going down to fourth place. Solid move from Chris Powell Prem. For any of you that wonder why I'm saying Prem after his name, it's because there are two Chris Powells in Club 100. It gets a bit confusing otherwise. So, yeah, Chris Powell is a former Prem champion back in the old format of Sprint Championship, as far as I know. This was before I joined Club 100, so someone please correct me if I'm wrong. And I can see he's already starting to gap me and catch up to Daz Teal ahead, so I'm sort of resigned to being in fourth place here. Definitely compromising my run through those corners there, just not quite getting far enough to the left to open up the two right-handers in the boot there. So heading on to the last lap here, sort of resigned myself to fourth place, to be honest, which is fine. I knew that's where I started, so it was by no means a bad race. But what you're about to see is it all starts kicking off ahead. So Peter Knight, very defensive, like he was on me, but on Daz Teal this time. That bunches the three of them up and slows them all down. Chris Powell Prem decides he's going to have an absolute send, almost a bit too much, nearly clips into Peter Knight and ends up compromising himself because he had to make sure he didn't make contact. And that brings me nicely back onto the back of Daz Teal, with Peter Knight shortly ahead as well, with only the boot of the circuit left to run. And it was going to be quite a tall order to try and overtake Daz here. I just didn't get the run out of the boot in that way, so I had to take a defensive approach up to the line because Chris Powell was right on my tail, but thankfully managed to hold third place. I had a really fun race here. I'll give everyone around me that as well. It was absolutely as clean as you like as well. So this is one of my favourite Club 100 races, be it a heat or a final, that I've had to date, and that almost foreshadowed how the rest of the day was going to go as well. I say almost. So heading on to Heat 3, and with another strong grid start in 5th place, this time on the other side of the circuit, which I feel is a bit of a disadvantage actually. You'll see what happens. So we've got Oscar Lancaster on pole, Eric Mignon in 2nd, Tom Fuller just ahead in 3rd, I'm in 5th. And you'll see what happens with the even side of the grid, getting the advantage through the second apex. So you can run pretty much side to side through the first turn, and we get a bit of an advantage being on the pole side of the grid, but then here is where it really makes a difference. Unfortunately, I got a tap from behind, which sent me into Tom Fuller there, so I ended up pushing him off a bit wide. But I'm down to 5th place, just relatively naturally. Now, managing to get up the inside of Cameron Moss there, thankfully, and I'm right on the back of Eric Mignon, who I've not raced against before. So I went for a lunge at Ashby, and unfortunately, he was equally late on the brakes. I couldn't stop, so I ended up making contact with him. Now, it was nothing too malicious, and he said he wasn't actually annoyed at me after we spoke about it after the race, but he ended up giving me a penalty for advantage by contact, which is completely fair enough. It's just one of those things. So all to do now, working on trying to chase down Dan Seeger, who's just moved into first place, with Oscar Lancaster in second. Worth mentioning as well that Dan Seeger came up from 8th to 1st on lap 1, so yeah, that's a pretty mega first lap from him. So skipping forward to lap, unfortunately Dan Seeger has completely cleared off into the distance, and none of us are going to catch him for the rest of the race. But thankfully I have managed to catch up to the back of Oscar Lancaster. You can see how relatively concerned he was about losing second place there, the amount he's looking over his shoulder. And that just fills the driver with confidence behind. So yeah, he takes the defensive line into Ashby, so I decided to hold station there, especially considering that I'd already picked up one penalty. And he's compromised his run from there, but holds the inside line, so I can't get through. And guess who pops up the inside? Good old Daz Teal again, like he did in Heat 2, so very much the opportunist in Daz Teal here. And thankfully I managed to follow him through, much in the same fashion that I did when he overtook Dan Seeger back in Heat 2. So we've got the same issue again here, where someone is in first and Daz is in second, and I'm trying to keep on the back of Daz now. Difference being that in this heat, I actually managed to stay on the back of him. Now, for the last few laps, we've kind of concertinaed together and then spread out a bit further. What I noticed is that generally across the lap, I feel like I had more pace. Maybe not the consistency that Daz did, but I did have more pace through most of the lap until we got to the boot, where Daz was definitely pulling away on the exit of the boot. But yeah, I've managed to stay with him on this one, which was happy days. So just trying to plot where I might be able to overtake, but I felt like I needed to just work my way a little bit closer to him to give myself that opportunity. So the most important thing was for me, compared with Daz, getting a good run through the boot. So I made sure I kept as left as possible there to really give myself the best run through the boot, and it totally worked. Managed to stay right on the back of him through the final corner, avoiding that ridiculous curb, and this is definitely the best chance that I've had all race to try and overtake. Not getting the greatest run through the first two corners, which for my standards was actually fine, it's just it wasn't as good as Daz. Making sure I stayed in his toe down the straight. I don't really know why he kept on a defensive line there. He could have merged back into the racing line and kept his speed up a bit more, but being a crafty little person by having a little weave in the braking zone there, so just making me a little uneasy about going for a chance, because I knew I already had a penalty and I really didn't want to get another one. It's just bad form, but getting a good run up to the boot here, so debating sizing myself up, so I made sure I kept as left as possible again, and that really gave me a great shot up the inside. But unfortunately you don't see it there, but there was a yellow flag being waved, and then it got brought in just as I was going to be able to overtake. So I made the right call not going for the overtake, because I would have been betting against what I'd just seen. So seeing the yellow flag, I just decided to back off, and that was the right decision at the end of the day. But had I kept my foot in it, I reckon I would have got second place, you know, which is kind of gutting, but one of those things. So yeah, I finished down in 7th due to the penalty, but I was still super happy to finish 3rd on the road. It's just yeah, it sucks that I got a penalty, but hey, my fault. So because of the really terrible first heat that I had, the decent second heat, and the not the best third heat because of the penalty, that lined me up in the B final. So I'm starting in 8th place in the B final, which is on the better side of the grid as far as I was concerned. We've got Daniel Cohen on pole with Eric Mignon in 2nd, Jason Bradbury 3rd, who's a Class 1, Bailey Morgan 4th, Stephen Westwood 5th, Stuart Hubbard 6th, Christopher Powell, other Christopher Powell, alongside me, who's a Class 1 as well. And then we've got a few really rapid Class 3s up the field in this one. So we've got Greg Smith in 10th, Ollie Flashman in 11th, just to name a couple more drivers. So you can see how strong the field was in this one. I'd worked my tyres really hard on the warm-up lap as well, because it had cooled down a bit by this point of the day. So you could see how hard people were trying to get heat into their tyres, but I found it made such a big difference, especially with the first 2 turns for the first couple of laps. You could carry so much more confidence into there. So, riding the brake with the throttle as I'm approaching the line to try and make sure I got the best launch by having torque in the engine, managing to stay on the back of the driver ahead, keeping it clean, thankfully not getting a nudge from behind and therefore not making contact with the driver ahead, managing to gain a couple of positions from other people falling off wide, which was great. Making the wrong decision around the outside of Christmas though. I don't really know why I did that, to be honest, so that meant that I lost a couple of positions going into there. I was just looking for space really, but it didn't pay off. And same again here. So I still had lingering in my head the penalty that I got in the third heat, so I just thought, right, I'll get a clean start to the race and then hopefully I'll find my pace and I'll make my way up through positions here. But you can see how far ahead Mr. First Place has got already. I think that's Dan Cohen in the lead anyways, and Jason Bradbury in second, so it's already looking kind of unlikely that I'm going to get in the A final, unfortunately. Managing to get a better run through the boot than the driver ahead, because I kept left again. Oh, and that was a bit of a 50-50 move. Now, I didn't even get a contact warning for that one, and I decided to keep going because I judged that I was far enough alongside that the guys should have seen me as it goes. So I can see Greg Smith ahead with Bailey Morgan and Eric Mignon in a little group, and well, I knew that their pace had been pretty strong all day, so for me I just wanted to try and get a bunch of clean laps in, hopefully without any challenges from drivers behind, and hoping that they were going to battle and then they would fall back into my path basically. And thankfully that is exactly what happened. So we've skipped ahead like a lap and a little bit. Eric's gradually holding up Bailey, who in turn is holding up Greg from the Constantina ring. Now you can see Greg here just gets a little bit of a better run, decides to go for a gap on Bailey. They give each other room, which is great, and Greg's still on the inside, so he stays there and takes the racing line, clips Bailey unfortunately, and decides that that was an unfair move and decides to back off to give Bailey the place back, which grants me 4th place. So happy days for me, but gotta say, Greg, I feel like you were a bit too polite there, mate. Like, that was a good move and you took your line. So, fair play for being super sporty, but I think you stitched yourself up there, to be honest. But, hey, I'll take it, because I'm up into 4th with no dramas at all. And thankfully, I've managed to close onto the back of Eric Mignon ahead after the end of that lap. So, what I should have really thought, considering this is the driver that I got an advantage by contacts from in the last race, I should have really thought, okay, Eric's pretty strong on the brakes, so I'm going to have to really outdo him going into Ashby if that's going to work. So I had a look, and I was on the brakes pretty much at the same point as him, but I was a bit worried about running into him again, so I decided to really get out of it then, and that meant that I lost a fair bit of ground to Eric, so it took me the rest of the lap to build this back up again. But you can see little differences between the way that we're approaching some of these corners. Now, I made sure for the rest of the day that I was trying to keep as left as possible, like my left-hand wheels on that dotted white line, to really give myself a better run through the right-hand corners on the boots. And you can see how much I've closed up to the back of Eric again here. So just trying to make sure that I got a better run through the first 2 corners this time. Unfortunately, giving him a bit of a nudge, which pushes him ahead. But I just decided, you know what? I've had enough. I'm going to send it. And it worked, which is great. Lovely. So that puts me up into 3rd place. And it's not where I wanted to be. I can see Jason Bradbury ahead. I wouldn't mind switching places with him, to be completely honest. So this was going to be a tall order. There's 7.5 laps to go. And I've got, I think it was a 3-second gap to the leader at this point, roughly 2 and a bit seconds to Jason ahead. And through previous races this year, I know that Jason's generally been a little bit quicker than me, or we've been pretty much on the same pace. So was kind of hoping that he might catch up to Daniel Coing, who's in the lead, and potentially fall back into me again. And that is exactly what happened on the penultimate lap. So Jason decided to have a go at overtaking Daniel a couple of times on the penultimate lap. Didn't work out, but it held both of them up, and now I am about, I think it was a second behind Jason at the start of this lap. I really, really wanted this A final, so you won't have heard it, but I was shouting like, come on, as I was going over the start-finish line each time, because I was just trying to keep myself super pumped. But what you don't know is that my 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th lap were all 53.6s, and they were all within a tenth of a second within that variance. So my consistency in this race was the best it's ever been in any race ever, but unfortunately it wasn't quite enough to catch up to them. So I finished, it's not that close to the guys ahead, to be honest, but I feel well happy with what I'd done to try and work up to the back of them. But I was so gutted that I didn't manage to get into second, which would have put me in the A final, because I've only got in one A final, which was at Buckmore in February. So it was just because of Heat 1, but that's just the way it goes. I have to say, I really enjoyed, I hope this isn't arrogant to say this at all, and I hope this is the case for other drivers, but I really enjoyed my own driving on this day as it goes. I just felt like I'd really maximised my performance, except for Heat 1. But we'll breeze over that. And I nearly got in the A final. Like you hear on the Alpha Live and Double Dash Media Motorsport coverage that they said that if I hadn't had a stinker in Heat 1, I definitely would have been in the A final, and that's how I felt as well. But really enjoyed the racing on this day again. Generally clean stuff, or at least it was clean from every other driver. I just happened to clip Eric in the third heat, and that made it not 100% a clean day. But yeah, serious thanks to everyone that was involved on this day. I had such a good time, and yeah, that leaves one more race for this year, which takes place at Rye House on what was a abysmally wet day, which was following the race that I did at Brands Hatch the previous day, so it was an abysmally wet weekend as it goes. Yeah, you can hear my disappointment there, but hey ho. So the vlog for Rye House will be up soon. It's not going to be with any onboard footage because I decided to concentrate on my buddying duties because there were a lot of new drivers at Rye House, so I volunteered as a buddy to help someone, a new person through the day. So you'll see the compilation of the Alpha Live with Double Dash Media Motorsport coverage that I'll put up on YouTube in the not too distant future. If you're enjoying the stuff, then feel free to subscribe, and I will see you guys again soon.